I profoundly believe the biggest problem in the world we're facing, from curing cancer to solve climate change to how do we deal with AI, etc. Those kind of problems don't have nationalities. They're not American, they're not Chinese, they're not German. And yet we can't help ourselves to constantly apply this kind of national border to those problems, which is so annoying and stupid. And I think for me to succeed solving this problem, we also have to figure out this power dynamics between this kind of national tendency to global problems.
Before we dive in, a quick whisper about today's sponsor, Ghost Founder. You know that moment when an idea jumps from someday to why not today? Ghost Founder lives in that moment. Ghost Founder takes the sketch from your napkin, gives it a heartbeat, and walks it out into the world. Fast. While everyone else is still writing pitch decks, the ghosts are wiring prototypes, lining up seed investors, and tuning your ops. Product market fit isn't just a hope, it's an outcome. If you're the kind of renegade who refuses to wait for permission, visit ghostfounder.com. Because around here, we scope things, build things, and fund things, in that order. Ghost Founder, the quiet engine behind loud breakthroughs.
Welcome. Today's guest is Zhu Scott, entrepreneur, investor, and mom. She's been named one of Forbes' top women in tech. She's advised on the HBO series Silicon Valley, which I actually binge watched and absolutely love. And she's also given a pretty snappy TED Talk about why your data should be treated like a valuable asset. Jen truly bridges East and West, tech and policy, business and ethics. And in this episode, we hope to dig into how she thinks about the future, how she makes high leverage, high value decisions, and what it takes to raise resilient kids in an AI-driven world. Welcome, Jen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Lao. It's great to be here.
Who wants to do the first question, Jay?
You go. You did such a good intro.
All right. Yeah. I'll keep my radio host voice going. Jen, so basically in the beginning, we're trying to understand a little bit about your personal journey and your personal history. This is our first encounter, so you're truly telling us everything for the first time, which really helps. But so with this list of accomplishments that I've just rattled off, which I know each of these items takes many years to accomplish, I guess where did you start? How did Jen become Jen of today?
A lot of people ask this question, but I think timing is everything. And I was born in the mid-70s in very small town of 1 million people in West China, very remote. And however, I'm also coming from a long line of family that may had a hard stop in terms of the assets and education opportunity in 1949, but it was a long line of very intellectual, very accomplished, both in terms of politics and business side of family. So carrying this kind of duality between poverty and lack of access, lack of information, lack of opportunities. Also knowing, my bloodline actually achieved some great things. And then be born in the mid-70s all the way through. I argue that our generation is the best, not only just the luckiest generation in China, but also luckiest generation probably in the entire human history, because there's no civilization that has witnessed in short 40 years of time accomplished so much. And my generation really coincides with that development, right? We suffer a little bit as children, but not enough to completely traumatize us. So we just remember things could be very different. And when we graduate from university, everything you do, whatever you choose to do, you are the first because everything's greenfield. So it's a low-hanging fruit, everywhere. And then by the time we get to my age, where China is today, and having the insights of understanding where China's coming from, where it's going, will be, with all this international exposure, education, linguistic abilities, ability to transit between different cultures and business and life context seamlessly, just positioning us with such power to do things that's different compared to if you're just coming from a very static kind of background. So I think it's timing, how I become, where I am, and using Western lens, including my TED Talk. The editors TED keep asking me, you have to talk about how you suffered and, your journey. But I find it so cringe whenever people, want me to talk about that, because millions of people experience exactly the same thing. I'm just one of them, and I got the lucky break. And so it ended up as that beginning of my TED Talk, telling that as a joke. So I think, yes, there's a lot of hard work, a lot of blood and sweat, but most important thing is really the timing.
Jen, so I watched your TED Talk, right, and I really enjoyed it. So we'll put a link to that, and I've already shared it with so many of my friends. So thank you for doing that. So you said you were born in the 70s, right? So I do quite a lot of work in China, and I rub shoulders with people that are born in the 80s and the 90s. And I guess better than I do, there's this sort of, they call it like a phenomenon, like people are like this Tang Ping thing, like where people say they just want to lie flat. And these are for people that I would say are born maybe in the 2000s, right? So could you give, you talked about timing, so could you give some of your perspective as to why, like when you tell me about your history, I have this vision of you, like you said, greenfield, right? You're just running and there's nothing holding you back, and everything that you're running into just looks better and better. And so everybody's motivated and everybody's trying hard, right? And how is it that in just a short 25 years time, right, the people born 25 years after you, they have the opposite. They say, hey, it's better to stand still. It's better to lay down. Like there's no point running if you can't win. Could you give some of your insights into that? Because it really interests me how this can shift so quickly.
First of all, I really appreciate in Lavi's intro, I'm a mother, and I think that's really a very important identity I have. When I think about this younger generation, I have very kind of maternal empathy to what they're facing. Their generation is very different compared to our generation. It's harder for them to really break, in the big way, like in our generation, right? Because anything that should be distributed in the society is much more distributed than 30 years ago. And unless you come from, extraordinary, family background, support, and if you just come from the bottom of the society and you are average intelligence, and you kind of hard to really make that pattern break, right, compared to our generation. So I 100% appreciate and understand, what's the point to kill yourself by working as hard if nothing fundamental is going to change, right? So I think it's a kind of a natural result. Perhaps it's an overreaction of this generation, where the face the reality that it's the low-hanging fruits no longer exist in the society, and the type of working they're facing is very much repetitive, and being divided into small pieces. They don't really get to see the big picture. And also, I think, don't forget, this generation is not only just facing the timing of the change of China, but also in terms of technological development, how things automated, how AI is now transforming entire society. With this kind of convergence, it's hard to blame this generation how they feel about camping, like lying flat, right? At the same time, I also think lying flat, tamping is not exactly as the kind of face value. a lot of this younger generation, they're embracing many different new ways of working, right? They don't treasure, like in our generation, in terms of status, as have a big job title in the corporates, or having, owning an property or asset. They're living in a very different way. In many ways, I think in Western society, younger generation is going through this as well. They don't feel like they need to own a house or cars or anything. And they kind of do this one person company enabled with AI. They don't really need a big title, but they live a life where, unlike our generation, we feel the need to accumulate and accumulate assets. They live a life that's quite free. They are not bounded by those kind of societal expectations, and they just live and work whatever serve their purpose at that moment. We'll see when they turn 50, how do they feel about this lifestyle. But right now, I totally understand. And in many ways, I envy their kind of sense of freedom. I don't need to be impressing anybody outside of myself.
Yeah, so I see that in my family as well. And I guess I'm a bit like you. I'm split. It's really hard to say who's smarter. Is it better to just have a job that helps you cover your expenses, cover your burn, and just live, travel, have fun, and not take things so serious? And when we ask, my wife's sisters, for example, it's like, why do you? It's like, well, wouldn't you want to have more of a career? Don't you want a promotion? You want more money? It's like, yeah, kind of, but then I have to do also so much more work, and it's so much more responsibility, and then I might lose sleep over it, and I might be stressed. And right now I'm none of those things, and I'm being appreciated at work for my contribution. And yeah, I don't make that much money, but it's enough, and
It's freedom. Don't you think?
it is freedom. It is freedom, I think. But then on the other hand, I think there's also a lot still in place in the world where this can also be really flip against you really quickly, right? Because if that job, it's a single point of failure, right? So if you're not investing because you don't really have surplus to invest, if you're not building anything because you don't really want to work that hard, you're not building anything that you own. I mean, then it also, in a recession, you lose your job, and then you're in trouble immediately. So it's I do see it also as risky at the same time, right?
That's why, sorry for kind of digress a little bit, but that's why I really believe in crypto, because we might not understand it, putting traditional asset kind of point of view, but for younger generation, all the meme coin, we think it doesn't worth anything. How come there's such market cap just for some comic images, right? But for the younger generation, they see this very differently. So, if they think that there's a value for things like this because of everything we just discussed, who are we to say you shouldn't regard that as something valuable? So I think this is kind of a generational change and paradigm change that we have to have enough humility to just embrace and try to understand instead of judge.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I was, like I said, in China, right, I met this guy who's a bartender by night, making cocktails, super nice cocktails, and then making coffees in the morning, right? And he was telling me, he's about, I think, his late 20s, and he said, yeah, I don't want to own a house, I don't want to have kids. He said, because you know what I'm going to do tomorrow? I'm going to read about Confucianism and understand it even better, and how it overlaps with Taoism and Buddhism, right? The three philosophies that underpin Chinese culture. And he's like, Jason, if I have a job, how am I going to do that? I can't, because then when I'm not at my job, I'll have to look after my kids and talk to my wife. And now I can go hiking, bring this book along with me and enjoy it while I'm overlooking like a crazy nice view, And so I do get it, right? That they maybe there'll be a slew of thick vein of philosophers or deep thinkers that come from this generation, right? Because they're a bit more detached from the day to day than we can imagine to be.
In many ways, weirdly, I spent a lot of time thinking about what would a good society looks like when AI runs everything, right? In a weird way, I think this kind of school of thinking that became increasingly mainstream for younger generation, it's almost preparing a society where you have to adjust that a lot of our hard work, constantly hustling, from our generation and older generations, uh, there will be a shift, right? And the role of human in the society will change. So I'm fully embracing it, and in many ways, I think for younger generation, they're doing much better job than us to really think about how we only live this life once, and every day is very valuable. And do you want to just go through endless corporate meetings that 10 years later you're not really moving much needle, or do you actually just really cherish every minute and read Confucius and have a hike?
So, but clearly you were not laying flat in your career. So, at least not as far as we know. You had mentioned earlier that you caught a lucky break. Can you talk a little bit about that? What would you say was that lucky break, or what was that pivotal point?
Good question. I think there are ways to look at, my first company, what did I do? What did I do with that? And then, with various investment or projects I'm involved in. But I'm gonna answer in a different way, because I think it's very important, especially for the younger generation, especially for female. In the professional field, and especially for female who are working in the very male dominant sectors and companies and environment. I think my luckiest break, kind of my true inflection point, was, I guess, in my late 30s. I had a short experiment of working in corporates and realized that I'm actually highly unemployable because I don't conform. I don't like all the corporate games. I don't want to listen to people, I think, frankly, dumber than me. And so I suddenly realized that, what, we live so much in the way that waiting for someone to define you. You are a podcaster, you are a public intellectual, you are entrepreneur, you are a corporate executive. This is how you should behave, how you should say, how you should dress. And I think in my late 30s, because of this kind of very profound conflict of working in the corporate against my nature of who I am, I realized that, what, nobody gets to define you. You just have to define yourself, and whatever that means, and stay very authentic to what you believe and what you can and cannot do, and then I chose the path that eventually, led to who I am today and who I will be going to. Often over the years, I get people asking me a question like, Jen, exactly what do you do? That question kind of annoys me so much, but at the same time also, makes me laugh a little bit, right? Because I mean, a lot of times people ask me this question out of good intention. It's because they are asking this question coming from that kind of a framework that society gave to you. Are you an entrepreneur? Are you a CEO? Are you an investor? Or are you a corporate executive? So they were limited in that framework. But I spend a lot of time and effort and resource make sure I am not in that framework. So I always want to respond them, sweetheart, doesn't matter. You don't have to understand, because my success is not relying on your understanding. But of course, I couldn't say that. But I think the kind of inflection point and turning point for my entire career is suddenly realize this inner agency. be able to kind of just define exactly my own path, even if that doesn't fit into anybody else kind of framework. So I think that's probably the most powerful realization in my entire career so far.
That's so cool. Thanks so much for sharing. Can you help us further by telling us how do you think you got that? What put that into you? And with, let's say, your kids or with other people that you interact with, how do you help them to find that for themselves? If it's
Uh,
possible to try and
yeah.
define.
By the way, I'm really old, so this like late 30s, a long time ago. So I don't remember exactly how that came about, but I just remember I was deeply unhappy in the corporate world and waiting for some mediocre man try to pat your shoulder and say you're ready to do this. And I just feel like no, you don't understand half of stuff I understand, and how the heck I have to wait for you to kind of define what I can and cannot do. And it sounds arrogant, but end of the day I think we live in this society. If you don't believe in yourself, you don't listen to your true inner ability, what you can do, how could anybody else listen to you, right? So embrace your true potential yourself is probably step one for you to really do something that the world will appreciate. So unfortunately, I think who said this? I think it must be uh, Nissim Taleb, author of a Black Swan. He said there are two things most addictive in this world. One is heroin, and another one is monthly salary. So
Yeah. That one really stuck with me as well. It's so true
yeah,
though, right?
it's so
Yeah.
true. Yeah, and I am entrepreneurial, and I create companies, and you have to suffer so much, bootstrapping, sometimes, dealing with things that you would never have to deal with in the corporate world. Everything's supported, especially your senior, and at the same time, um, my earning, upside is so much bigger than any of those corporate executives ever get, right? And so I look at that kind of support people subscribe to, not only just monthly salary, probably your driver and your secretary and your assistant, your chief of staff, all of that. I keep thinking that's really expensive. All of that. That the salary is expensive. The corporate support system is expensive. So this is not for everybody, but for me personally, I just think it works for me to take a bet on myself, and I guess that's the kind of wake up moment for me.
Very nice. Yeah, I haven't spent a lot of time in corporate, and it also wasn't even that big of a company. But I had an experience that was also meaningful to me working for a e-commerce company in Germany, and they fancied themselves a competitor with Amazon. And they had about, at the time when I was there, 600 employees total. And then I read this article about Amazon's search optimization, because Amazon, turns out, in the US is like the second or third largest search engine, right? Like Google, YouTube, and then Amazon, something like that. And they have about 800 engineers just optimizing search results. And I was like, yeah, we're not really in a business of competing with Amazon. But then that was not the profound insight. It was just then, I was given quite a bit of responsibility for delivering certain outcomes. And I was like, okay, great. Well, here's a couple of challenges. Here's how I would solve them. They're like, no, you can't solve them like that. I'm like, okay. It's like, no, we define the problem for you, and we also define the solution. It's your job to make it work. And I was like, man, that's not how this works. You give me a problem, I'll figure out how to solve it, but you have to leave that up to me, right? So I was like, yeah, this is. I never had another experience in my life where I so much felt like my time, like my life force, is draining out of me. Where I was just, every minute I spent in these endless meetings, endless conversations, I was like, I could just go and do this. Why do we have to discuss it until everybody's like green in the face? Can we just freaking do it? And so, yeah, then that was but I guess it was the pain that I needed to then step out and bet on myself more. So it was good in the end, but it's interesting that you had maybe a similar experience.
Yeah.
Jen, so you're a co-founder and CEO, right, of this company called Powerdynamics. So
Mhm.
before I ask you what this company does, can you tell me how do you balance what you just said about, not defining people too much and not getting them addicted to a salary, right? How does that square with co-founding a company where people are working for you? So how do you find that strike that balance?
First of all, I think balance is a word that's overused and misleading. Better word is alignment, and balance suggests temporary. Because you balance now, next moment it's probably not balanced, and balance also suggests a conflict, right? Because you have to make sure both sides equal somehow. I found whenever I used to frame a lot of those kind of conflicts in life with balance as well. You balance as working mom, you balance as woman in this, and it's always ended up with a lot of exhaustion, and the results is not very good. And so I realized that alignment is a better way to approach this. The alignment in um, having companies as employees, with employees that work for that salary, versus my own choice, right? Is that you recognize that each individual is very different. Each individual is built very different. This kind of very high risk, high reward entrepreneurial pursuit is not for everybody. Some people, because of who they are, because of their family needs, etc., they need to um, take that salary, right? I fully respect that, and I appreciate that. So as CEO, you have to find people who are the right kind of people to do that kind of role, and align with your overall purpose with the right kind of people. And also, I think, for example, my husband works in a corporate, and because he works in a corporate, he takes care of the safety net. Therefore, I am able to take high risk, high reward type of work, right? So I have a lot of respect for people to do that. It's not a disdain of people taking salary. That's terrible. So I think if you can align with what people good at, prefer to do, and the role they prefer to play, the risk appetite of everyone, then you can create this kind of cohesive, organic environment that everyone play their role, and that role is the right role for them.
It's a bit like, again, a Nassim Taleb quip or thought where he talks about the barbell strategy, right? Where he says for
Yes.
his investing, he's got the ultra safe and the ultra risky. So with you and your husband, that's also made me think of that. Like you can go out there and take the risks knowing that the home front is taken care of, right?
100%.
Oh,
Um,
earlier you commented when people ask you what do you do, it's a bit of bit of an annoyance. So rather than asking that, what are you working on right now?
Nice
uh,
one, Lovis. Nice one.
Thank you. Thank you. So I have been investing, both my own money and also clients, with some large families in Asia, with AI software, especially efficient AI. And also, I love crypto. Anyone follow me on Twitter, they would know that I don't ever invest anybody else's money in crypto, but I personally really love crypto because I'm applied math major, and Satoshi's paper just completely sold me from day one. So we also invest some Web3 companies that's institutionally ready, and especially in the past few years, I realized that digital economy essentially will run by AI, which governs all the analytical, pattern recognition, decision making, generative system. You also have the Web3 type of solutions, working on authentication, transaction, ownership, etc. So what the digital society going to look like is on the top layer, you have those two things kind of running everything pretty much. And then in the bottom layer, there are two things that's really needed. One is energy and one is compute. And also 2.5 years ago, I realized that as I started to analyze all these AI companies, I realized there's no way for me to predict which AI company going to win. The ones who will have sure wins, it's uninvestable, because they're tens of billions of valuation, or you just invest in the public market if you really believe in them. And for startups, it's just impossible to bet on them. It's highly risky. And so I realized that the real problem that needs to solve, that everybody needs, is how I can make the energy part as sustainable as possible, and then make the compute part, as from infrastructure point of view, as efficient as possible. So I've been working on this company in stealth with my partner and a very big factory in South China for 2.5 years. Didn't tell anybody pretty much. And so what we accomplished is that basically powerdynamics is probably the only company in the world right now has consolidated the full BESS, so battery energy storage system, from kilowatt, megawatt to gigawatt capacity, and from battery cell to rack to container to AI-powered energy management system that directly through IoT connected with the hardware, and to all the converters, and to enable a kind of a microgrid to utility type of ESS system. At the same time, also married that with very advanced cooling technology, that's immersion cooling for both battery and GPUs. So we put those kind of everything into a container and produce the modular data center or compute infrastructure that's much more energy efficient and much more efficient in terms of compute. And you can plug and play. So right now, I just came out as the CEO about a week and a half ago, and start to go around the world to do roadshows, meeting with the companies that really not only just thinking about sustainability of compute as a slogan, but actually thinking about where are the nuances in this part, right? It's not only just electricity, it's water, it's land, it's noise, it's any evaporation of the chemical that actually cause film in the atmosphere. And I must say, this is a very exhilarating space to be in, and it's a very big space to be in, where we are talking about national strategies. And I kind of joke with my partner, because he's the electronic engineering background and applied math. So from applied math to physics, it's a very easy transition. But you cannot derive from math, physics to chemistry. Chemistry, you have to kind of just start from scratch and learn. And so it's in the past couple of years, it's been a very steep learning curve for me. And then power dynamics is basically math plus physics plus chemistry, because all the coolant, you really need to understand why we use this component, not that. And then electronic engineering, and manufacturing, and supply chain, and business, and geopolitics. So it's been fun, to put it that way. That's what I'm working on.
Very cool.
Well, sounds so cool. I want to sign up.
Is the but is your strategy to take it? I guess, is the factory the product, or is the compute the product, or what's the idea?
Great question. I love this question. I think the entire industry, first of all, manufacturing is so interesting. Once you spend some time in factories and you see how things are made, it really transforms your thinking. And to figure out manufacturing is probably one of the most intellectually challenging task in my entire career. So a lot of companies or brands in this sector, all related to the factory, their kind of end road is just thinking about, we're going to sell the products. When you sell the products, you actually change the mentality of the innovation cycle, right? You're thinking about the customer going to use the product and for a number of years, and then I will improve and bring to the next version. And for some products that might work, people change their phone probably once or twice a year. But for what we do is actually, it doesn't really work, because once you invest in infrastructure like this, you want to be able to use for 10, 15, 20 years. So how can we stay in the innovation cycle? And also, how do we stay different? How do we differentiate with others, right? And the mentality has to come from, we're not really only just selling the products. If you want a product, I'll sell it to you. But end of the day, the preferred business model is actually, I'm selling the capacity with you. So putting a very tangible term is that if it's a microgrid, I'm not just selling you BESS and all the software, everything comes with it. I would prefer to become independent power provider, IPP, and I sell that power with you to the customers in the grid. So I am embedded into the solution for the next 10, 15, 20 years. Any upgrade, any necessary changes, I will be with the grid, right? Same for compute as well. I would much rather either independently or in collaboration to sell compute with data centers. So it will benefit for them as well in order to have such important part of infrastructure directly in their innovation cycle, right? So we will be able to upgrade everything together, because it will be my interest. My interest is in the next 10, 15, 20 years, for the life of the infrastructure, stay competitive, stay efficient, instead of I sell the product, wash my hands, move to the next.
Yeah,
And I think
So
actually I think that's very important nuance that a lot of people are not thinking about in terms of sustainability as well, right?
it's so I'm involved in a project that has some components in common. It's called Water with 2 T's, water.com. So my company does rapid prototyping and product development, and we have I'm based out of Dallas, and I have a big company as a client that's in the energy space. But so I would like to discuss it with you, but probably not right now.
Sure.
But so it's you've hit on so many points, so like my neurons are firing. But one thing that you said is, which is very interesting, you actually define power dynamics as it's an infrastructure play. I would say it's an independent power provider, and I think a key aspect that a lot of people don't understand about power, about electricity specifically, is that it's not actually a product, it's a service.
Yes.
And so that's why you have to stay with the client, because you can't, like, it's not a one and done thing, right? Open the project, deliver, and wash your hands. It just doesn't work that way. And then, of course, it is also an incredible business model, because when you look at the richest corporations in the world that nobody talks about, those might be power utilities or energy producers, right? So
Yep.
it's
You got it.
yeah. So it's incredible, really cool. Jay, you were going to ask a question. I cut you off, I think.
no problem. I think I still remember the question. Yeah, it comes back to alignment again, right? In this case, with this business model, you are aligned. The better service you provide, actually, the more profit you can make. At the same time, the customer's happier, and at the same time, I'm in sales, right? Selling equipment globally, capital goods, and we always have to remind the new guys, right? Like your current customers are your best customers. Like don't go calling anyone else new until you're sure that everybody that's already using your product is super happy, because they're gonna buy again. They're gonna give your R&D team direction, everything you need, right? So keep them happy. And I think with your business model now, it's nice. You will know whether or not they're happy, and you can build those long-term relationships, right?
Yeah, and also financially, it's much more rewarding as well. And I mentioned earlier that this is a very important nuance to think about sustainability. That's a little bit missing in a lot of people's mindset. Is because um, for something that the shelf life is that long. And if you just sell a product and then you wash your hands and you go and then you try to sell the next iteration, you improve a little bit, everything will be out of date in the next 3-5 years, and you expect this to use 5, 10, 20 years. And what's missing is that all the efficiency you could have gained if you aligned your financial interest and the business model interest into the entire innovation cycle, right? So I think that's kind of the nuance that people are not really considering. I've learned so much in this process. Really helped me to rethink how we can make digital economy a lot more sustainable. And it's not what's on the surface in terms of people thinking about electricities and water, and those are very, very important, but all the way to the point of what kind of a shareholder structure you should have to enable this kind of innovation. A lot of people are not really thinking about it or not in the position to think about it. So yeah, one day I will write a very, very long piece once I get through this busy period.
Yeah, please do, because it's another aspect of alignment, right? You need different investors. You can't have investors that want a quarterly ROI immediately, right? You need the investors that are happy to deploy money for a couple decades and be patient, right?
Yeah, we have taken so much burden to make sure Power Dynamics today we have R&D, product, manufacturing, everything's done, but only 2 shareholders, just my partner and me. And that gives us so much freedom and power, combining with our alignment in terms of what we think is important to make digital economy very sustainable. And that enable us to really go 5 years from ahead of any other players who are under pressure either from their private investors or public market shareholders to do something that doesn't immediately appear to be making short-term commercial sense, but in 5 years that would be very, very relevant. So I think the world really needs this, and I feel very privileged to be able to help the world to solve this problem in this kind of structure.
You've also given it a very apt name, because there's a good chance that your product will have favorable power dynamics in the future.
I give a lot of thoughts, with that name. It's also power dynamics in the way that I have never shared with anybody about this. Actually, it's always been like in my private mind about this, because I profoundly believe the biggest problem in the world we're facing, from curing cancer to solve climate change to how do we deal with AI, etc. Those kind of problems don't have nationalities. They're not American, they're not Chinese, they're not German, and yet we can't help ourselves to constantly apply this kind of national border to those problems, which is so annoying and stupid. And so I think for me to succeed solving this problem, we also have to figure out this power dynamics between the tension between this kind of national tendency to a global problem. So yeah, that's another layer of consideration.
Yeah, because actually I wanted to say just now when you were saying, hey, with this company, you need to know about chemistry, physics, mathematics, electronics, right? I think a big part will be the cultural gap, like because everybody wants that final outcome, I guess, right? But to contextualize it culturally for them so that they accept it, I think that's also going to be a challenge, right?
Yeah. And which is, I think it's a responsibility for people like all of us, where you come from very distinct kind of cultural background. You were brought up with very distinct cultural identity, and yet you live around the world and you speak languages that beyond your mother tongue. And we kind of have a duty to communicate in a very different way, work in a very different way, to come up with more kind of human-based solutions and approach to, rather than one country has to be better than other. And it's fun to have that competition. But end of the day, for problem as profound as what we are trying to solve, you kind of have to go above that kind of national frame.
Just before we jump away, right, from power dynamics, it's just so that I get it really clear. Is it going to be something that's very plug and play? Like, could you, for example, go to a remote island of Indonesia that currently doesn't have electricity, and you can just rock up with this thing on your ship, maybe just dock somewhere, and then just start things rolling?
You guys are reading my minds. So we actually did not compare notes before this podcast, but you're asking all the right questions. Obviously, the hyperscaler type of customers are very much need to adopt this kind of solution, because even from the improvement PUE, it's can directly translate into their ROI. And but I also, because I love crypto, I love decentralization. I think decentralization is very important to build a good digital society. So in many ways, I have been spending time with my engineering team to work on this off-the-grid, decentralized kind of approach. So BESS, by nature, by default, enables off-the-grid electricity supply, right? So if you're on an island, you don't really have a connection to the grid. Of course, you can use battery and solar or wind and be able to supply you. But also, I'm on the board of Sui. So Sui is now, Sui is a layer 1 blockchain that's created by the most senior team at Facebook when Facebook created Libra and DM. So when Libra didn't work, the team left, and so those people, they wrote Move language and all the essential technology, creates a company called Miston Lab, and that raised 300 million plus from A16Z, etc. And then as a result, they built Sui blockchain that is now the most scalable, the throughput is much more real world ready compared to any other blockchain before. And not only that, the team is kind of building unlike some of the other similar projects, they basically build layer 1, start to throw money to bring applications on the blockchain in order to pump the token price. But this team, I'm so honored to be on the board and be on this journey with them, because they're really building the new internet. So they're building the entire stack, from decentralized storage, decentralized domain name, etc. So the reason I bring this up is because I think with foundational model like DeepSeek that enable very, very efficient, AI model to full stack decentralized internet that creates by the Sui team, I think it's possible that you could just be on the island, like you said, Jason, and use solar plus battery and connect to Starlink or something, and you will be able to have your local, very intelligent digital economy that does not connect to any of the grid, right? And with all the blockchains in the world, everyone love talking about decentralization. But I bet if you peel enough onion, you peel enough through the onion, all the so-called decentralized blockchain ended up in AWS, and it is centralized somewhere. So having this kind of solution that you basically have a portable battery with perhaps one GPU or a few Mac M3, and with the solar panel, and you will be able to have this kind of decentralized nodes in the middle of nowhere and have thousands of them everywhere in the world, and then you truly have a decentralized blockchain, right? So as a kind of disaster response, actually. And so we have been working with the largest food distributor in Myanmar, and since earlier this year. And in the middle of the process, because they're trying to bring some best into their businesses, right? CNI is a very big application for power dynamic solutions. So in the middle of this process, the earthquake happened. And so my team very quickly developed this kind of stackable, portable batteries on the trolley. You can basically put on wheels and stack it back in your car, and 2 kilowatt hour per unit, but stackable. So let's say if it's a family, just need cooking and lighting, etc. 2 kilowatt hour is enough. But if you want to have a local convenience store or medical center, you probably need 5 to 10, right? So you can stack them together and combine with this kind of foldable solar panel, and then you don't need to worry about electricity. Right now in Myanmar, there are only about 2 or 3 hours a day supply of electricity. So we're in process to help to provide that to Myanmar. So this company with their small convenience stores, they will be able to keep the perishable fresh. And solution like this combined with compute, I can really envision this kind of decentralized economy, not only just on software, but also on how.
Well, it's really cool. So your diversity of just backgrounds and experiences and different projects you've been involved in has really helped shape this solution, right? So it sounds awesome, Jen. So I want to pivot away a little bit to more, I guess, meta level of innovation. So Jason and I talk a lot about the East and the West, right? He's Jason's the product of a Chinese mom and an Australian dad, but you grew up in Singapore, right? And I'm super German, but I spend most of my time in the US, and my wife is American, and my business is in the US. And so the reason also, I think, why we were able to ask pretty good, hopefully you said, your words, you said pretty good questions, is because we've spent time working in solar and, the projects I'm involved in right now, innovation projects all around surrounding energy topics. But what we find right now is that it appears that China is leapfrogging the West in, there's a new report every day. So a new industry is being leapfrogged, it feels like, every day at the moment. I know these are like, overnight success, 10 years in the making type of things, but it feels a little bit from my Western perspective that we're losing connection, right? We're being outpaced. And so you've definitely spent an extensive amount of time also in both worlds. And I would really love to hear from you where you see respective strengths in, innovation, solving problems, and where do you see blind spots?
Oh my God, so much to unpack here. But let's take a step back. I think, yes, in the past years, everything's a surprise to the West. EV was a surprise, and military fighter jet is a surprise, and how Chinese cities look like a surprise. DeepSeek is a surprise. Robotics is a surprise. Whenever you find something's consistently surprising you, probably the signal is that you are consistently underestimate, right? That's the reality. Instead of it's a surprise. So I think. And I know, Louis Gaff, who was on your podcast before, he always made this point as well. I am a Chinese, so I go back and I see everything, and it's easier for me. But Louis is actually one of very, very few high-profile public intellectual an investor who has made an effort to really go in and with humility and to see what's happening, not only just in China, but also in emerging markets around the world. So I think the world has changed and is changing so fast. And what's happening in China and also how the media is reporting China is fundamentally doing disservice to the world because of a combination of the prejudice, innate prejudice, we have to admit, in the West, combined with this kind of media that's always have very negative bias, that's propelling this kind of constant surprise of what's happening in China. I always say that if you are running a sizable business or a respectful size of portfolio, you're a business decision maker, you should just go to China. Don't go to the obvious Beijing, Shanghai. Go to second tier cities like Chengdu and Wuhan, Nanjing, etc., just to see how people live there and how the city operates. And you can walk away, love or hate China. I don't care. But if you didn't, bring your humility, go on the ground and see what's actually happening in that country, you will be profoundly misunderstand the changing world. So that's point one. Point two is yes, East versus West, right? And we are very lucky, kind of have exposed to both, and I think there's a lot of Eastern value that actually probably serve this world a lot more better right now. One is the long-termism, right? Eastern culture tend to think, multi-generational, and West don't. Second one is community versus individual. I think focus on yourself is great, make you feel good, but at the same time, we live in this global village. Having this kind of Eastern community prioritize, before individual, and have this very relational identity. In Chinese culture, that you are not just Zhu Scott. I'm my husband's wife, and I'm a mother of my daughters, I'm daughter of my parents, and I'm sister of my brothers, and I'm colleagues and partners of all my business associates, and that kind of relational existence is much more important in Eastern culture than in the West. As me as an individual, this is what I want, this is what I prefer. And also, lastly, I think the most important thing is this kind of win-win mentality versus zero-sum mentality. Between especially U.S. and China, if you compare, and I think the disconnect right now is that China thinks that it just wants to become the best version of itself, and it's realizing its own right to revitalize the success we have been witnessed multiple times in the past 5,000 years. And U.S. mentality is we must be number one, and we have to stay as number one. And for China, it feels we're going to be the best version of ourselves. And if in the process that we bypass anybody, it's just a byproduct. It's a collateral damage. We don't really care. That's where we want to be. And we want to create this kind of win-win situation instead of one must be better than other. And of course, I'm generalizing here, right? Having said that, I'm reluctant to compare this West versus East because we're generalizing so much. US and Germany is very different. China and Japan are very different. West Coast and East Coast of the US are very different. So if we can talk about what's in common for a second instead of what's different, I happen to believe, and multiple people, in my life have discussed this with me as well, this kind of observation, that if we think about the biggest conflict, perhaps is going to be a theme of the geopolitical dynamic for the rest of our life, is the US-China dynamic. And I actually think Chinese are more similar to the Americans than Americans to German or Chinese to Japanese. We're very industrious and very hardworking and very competitive, and sometimes can be very ruthless, right? And a lot of those traits we actually share with each other, and very ambitious. And I think, yes, the East-West, there are a lot of differences, and there are a lot of innate conflicts. But I think if we can live in a world where we embrace each other's differences and coexist, and learn to coexist peacefully, and have the humility to learn from each other instead of constantly compare and bashing, etc. Probably the world will be a little bit better. So there's this Chinese term that has always used in every single diplomatic statement in China. It's called 求同存异. 求同 is pursuing the common ground, and 存异 means allow the differences to coexist. So yeah, I love both West and East, and I think I can learn from both sides, and I adopt a lot of different value from both sides. It's possible to have both.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm really glad that you reframed it. And I feel bad for asking the question the way I did now.
Please don't.
But of course, it's a way to get the point out, right? But yeah, I'm a very optimistic person about the future in general, and technology, of course, plays a big role in that. But then at the end, technology is just that, right? It's a tool. It's not our don't want to have a religious discussion, but it's not the essence of what makes us human, right? These are tools that we use to make life better. And fundamentally, I think that by a collaboration, focusing on the common ground, like you said, we could live in a utopian future, right? We could all be driving silent, clean EVs that cost almost nothing, that are incredibly safe. And we could have like I don't know, the way I envision Singapore, right? It's everything is high tech, everything works, it's super safe, it's super clean, and people are pursuing their purpose, make a ton of money, and they're happy, generally speaking, right? So I think there's a lot more to be gained by collaborating than by beating each other down. And I always thought, in Germany, there's always been so much China bashing with, they steal all our IP, but then they make it better and cheaper. And I'm like, well, I mean, how would I develop products. I'm like, well, you guess, where I start? I buy off the shelf stuff and I modify it. And that's where you start. You always start with someone else's creation. It all stacks on top of each other. Like, what do you expect me to go and do? Go and mine the ore to then smelter the steel to then make the thing? Like, it's just not how it works, right? You always build, it always stacks, right? So it's,
I just came back from Munich, and my conversation in Germany consistently being German side wants my technology and wants my transfer to Germany and Europe instead of other way around. So I think the media has been very irresponsible, and in many cases very intentional, and it does disservice for all the investors in the West, and make them miscalculate what's really happening in the world. It's very stupid things to do.
But Jen, what I noticed that shocked me was I started living in Germany in 2015. And that's also the same time when I worked for this German company and needed to go to China a lot, right? And I remember when I first went to China, came back, tried to share what I saw and, share what was happening. It's just like they don't come out and flat out say I'm lying, but they just cannot accept what I'm saying to be true, right? And it's because you mentioned earlier about how, if you're consistently surprised, then maybe you're underestimating, your expectations are wrong. But it was weird for me to see firsthand. I'm talking to people that I would say are trusted friends or family of mine, but they just could not accept it, right? They just could not accept that, hey, I started in 2015, the whole line was German or American. It's 2018 now, and there's one small aspect now that's still European, the rest is Chinese. They just could not accept it. And I find it very difficult to explain why they can't accept it, right? So I don't know. I think the media... I agree with you. The media is being irresponsible, but then I tend to ask myself, if the media were to come out and just do an expose on China, would people accept it? It's like maybe the gap is too big now. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I have a very simple explanation to this. It's prejudice. Even I think probably Financial Times will be, I would say, outlier right now. They actually try to report a lot, business reality. In terms of how China is ahead of the West, and in terms of technology. So, including my own experience, I multiple paper invite me to write op-ed, and with some of them halfway through, I just realized this is not about my opinion. It's about the editor's opinion. They want me to tell their opinion. And I have to say, FT actually, I recently wrote a piece on DeepSeek when DeepSeek came out in January, and they really made an effort to respect my own words, and of course the edit, but they actually make sure none of my opinions twisted right in the process. So for FT, which is supposed to be very trusted, news resource compared to a lot of others, and it's very business centric. You can go on Twitter to watch whenever they post any article that's remotely positive. You can just read the comments. People are completely in denial on anything that's positive, right? So I think the Chinese government is doing one thing right. Recently, they just make visa free for everybody. Just come over and take a look. If everybody went to China and came back to say the same thing, and yes, prejudice will always prepare you to believing certain things and disbelieving certain things. But if everybody's saying that, what does that say about you, right? So, myself included, whenever I say anything that's actually truthfully happening in China, people say, "Oh, you're pro-China." I'm like, no, I'm pro-truth. I pro-people. I don't care. Every country should do well. Every people should have a chance to do well. But it just so happened China now is doing really well in so many different ways. They get the city right. They get their, balance between capitalism and society right. They get technology right, and they get innovation right, and they get the domestic sentiment right. If you talk to average Chinese about how optimistic they feel about future versus average American or average European, you will see this is such a dramatic difference, right? I spend a little bit of time on social media. I spend most of my time on Twitter. I love Twitter. And I also spend some time on Xiaohongshu Red Note, which is a Chinese app that I started using it when TikTok refugees started to go on Xiaohongshu. And then occasionally, I have a very, very private account on Instagram just for friends and family. Occasionally I go on Instagram. So whenever I go on Twitter, I feel like World War III is imminent. It's going to happen next Thursday for sure. And nuclear will be involved. And when I go on Instagram, I feel I'm fat, I'm ugly, I'm poor. And,
yeah.
and my house is not beautiful enough. I'm not traveling to exotic places enough. And then when I go on Xiaohongshu, for some reason, I feel wholesome. I feel good. I feel I'm learning something. And I don't know how I can't really pin down, but entire sentiment is so different, right? So I think for people who have that kind of stubborn prejudice or refuse to believe, they should just go pay a visit and see with their own eyes, right? Don't let any other people tell you. Just see with their own eyes. Plus, everything in China right now is so cheap compared to US and Europe, and you get better service and it's very safe. Why not? So, especially with tariff, shopping in China is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I told Lovis, when I said nobody believed what I was telling them, my wife believed, right? And she was always saying, "Hey, but we got young kids now; it's a bit hard." But 2-3 months ago, when the visas, were opened, she actually said, "Hey, let's go to China." So, And I purposely did what you said, right? I didn't want to go to Shanghai or Beijing. I didn't want to go to a tier one city that I'm usually hanging out in for business. I myself wanted to go to China to see it, like as if I'm on holiday, which I've never been to China for a holiday. I've always been busy and working, right? So we went to Yunnan and we went to Kunming and Dali, right? And the experience for my wife and myself and my two young kids was so good, and everyone was friendly. It was safe. And you would not think this is not a tier one place, right? You're in the city center. There's 4 lanes on each side, right? All EV, so you don't hear any combustion engines. My wife said, what really, really stuck out to her was how quiet everything was. She's like,
Yeah.
I can see only cars, but I can't hear anything,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And yeah, and she felt super safe, and everyone was so friendly. They came up to us to ask if we were okay, what do we need, oh, let me give you a recommendation on where to eat. And it's just overall, like you said, wholesome, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, so I can only agree to say I hope anyone who hears this podcast takes the chance, if they can, to go make a visit, because once you're there, you can make up your own mind, right? You
Yeah.
can see the people for yourself. You can see the technology. It's up to you to then decide what China is, right?
Yeah, and I think what's missing in a lot of those kind of reports, etc. Often media report. I don't blame the business, media, because they don't have any choice, right? They have to report company, or they have to report, as a nation's economy. But one thing is really missing in this kind of international narrative is just how kind and generous average Chinese people are. Like, people could not believe, I have friends go to China, and it just strangers will go out of their way, spending time and money and just to help them. It's the nature of the people, it's the hospitality, the kindness, and it's really beyond. And I really hope more people can experience that, instead of just being, believing this very generalized, demonized view of Chinese people. I feel that part is really, it's a shame. And I hope more people get to experience that.
So I kind of, it's hard for me to bridge that gap. So many thoughts at the same time. But clearly, when you were a child, Jen, China was not nearly in as good of a place as it is now. And I've kind of developed my own theory. I'm a very very novice philosopher. but I try to understand, how people think and what makes them tick. And something that resonates with me strongly is just general libertarian ideas, right? And a big tenet of that, actually, probably the most important one, is the property rights, right? I think that property rights, strong property rights, are important for all people. I think regardless of culture or background or ethnicity or geolocation, because it fundamentally gives them the ability to to build something that will last longer than themselves. So I think it helps instill long-term thinking, which I think is something you mentioned before is very prevalent in the Chinese mind. And I find it's very short-term, also what you said earlier, in the West. And I think you can see it. So in Germany, it's actually a beautiful case study. When you go to a German city that wasn't bombed into rubble during World War II, so maybe an eastern city, right? So Jason and I met in Leipzig. He still lives there. And there's large stretches, whole neighborhoods that were preserved, essentially. And this stuff was all built like 1890s to 1910. So you see this gorgeous architecture, like stone masonry, wood carving, like insane, like the best of the best at the time. And it endures until today, and it's still glorious and beautiful, right? And then you see new construction next to it, and you're like, what's that? Like, why? Like, it's not the window, like, it's everything is trimmed for efficiency, but it feels cheap, and it won't last. Or maybe it will last, but it's only because it's steel reinforced concrete, but it's not actually, it doesn't quicken the spirit, let's just say.
It's not beautiful in any way, right? You couldn't say it's beautiful.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a long rant to kind of get to a point. somebody told me that, and it piqued my interest during your TED talk. You had mentioned Shenzhen being designated a free economic zone, and to me, what that means is, and I don't know if I'm correct, but it means that it, in a big way, gave people enforced personal property rights within the free economic zone. I think it alleviated a lot of taxation, a lot of bureaucratic burden to go and do stuff, business, entrepreneurship type stuff. Would you say it's fair that that is something that kind of lit the fuse to launch this rocket of innovation and prosperity that China is experiencing?
Yeah, I think in a simple term, that kind of special economic zone definitely serve a few key purposes. Number one is allow people to expand what they could do, but more importantly, I think allow government to see and observe what could work. Right, a lot of Shenzhen's policies, a decade and a half later, became not so unique to Shenzhen anymore because the sandbox worked, and so they expanded it to other part of the country. In late 90s, this is really reviewed. I have not been trying to hide my age, but this field made me feel really old. In the late 90s, I started my first company. I basically packed my bag and moved to Shenzhen, and without knowing anybody, and rent a place and started my first company. At that time, in Futian district, my office was Futian district. My office building is new, but outside of the office building, the highway is new. Across the highway was rice field. so that was what Shenzhen looked like, right? It's a kind of direct, what its raw and original condition as a fishing village to modern, city building right next to each other, contrasting. And I think the most important part in this is that if you think about Chinese culture and what kind of what makes, in many ways, I think this is probably a little bit big to expand, but I'm going to try a little bit because in a lot of modern narratives often associate China as a Communist Party and, Communist Party leading this country. What is the ideology of the Communist Party? But if you compare to the entire history of China, the Chinese people as an entity compared to the current regime is a very, very small part, right? What has been consistent is that Chinese people are extremely hardworking, and meritocracy is built within our DNA, became epigenetic, because for thousands of years you could be born in the bottom of the society, and if you're smart, you're hardworking, you take exams, you will be able to end up working, with the emperor, right? So meritocracy is very much in our, epigenetics. This does not exist in India, for example. If you're born in the bottom caste, that's your destiny, and also, Chinese people are just very entrepreneurial. This is why there's only one kind of race or cultural entity ended up have its little city in pretty much every city in the world, right? You have Chinatown in every city in the world because people open laundries and have restaurants and build small businesses, convenience stores, and they all have this very strong family union. So ended up it became a very strong community. So I think when you have special economic zone like that and allowing people to innovate and create, and you get to keep what you create in many ways, it just unleashed this what's already innate in Chinese people anyway, right? And that's why I think if you are in hardware business and there's no place in this world compared to the entire Shenzhen ecosystem, if you want to build a prototype of anything, we're talking about, you send something in the morning, in the afternoon, you will receive the prototype and it's still hot when you receive it. It's from, straight away from the factory. So I do think that having this kind of special economic zone with respect to the nature of the labor, of the talents, of how the community work could work. But this model is not always replicable because we have seen many special economic zones, special industry park in all over the world, and ended up they did not work, right? So they're just sitting there and not really doing anything. So I think you can talk about policy, special economic zone without talking about the nature of the people who are gonna actually make things happen within that zone.
Can I just share one anecdote? I think you guys might enjoy it. So back to how every country has a little, or every city has a Chinatown, right? So when I was a young boy, my mom told me, "Hey, Jason, uh, anywhere on the planet where there's water, you'll find somebody from China." And I was like, "Ha ha, mom, yeah, sure, whatever, right? You're just saying that to like, give dad a hard time, right?" And then when I was 23, I was in Scandinavia for an exchange year. And then we had 2 weeks off. And me and a few friends went to almost to the polar circle to like sit on dog sleds, right? And so I was in this city in Norway called Narvik, right? And of course, it's dark, it's cold, it's horrible. We had no money. We were staying in a cheap hostel, right? I was so hungry, and all my German friends were just eating like cold bread and cheese, right? And I was like, oh, I don't want to. So anyway, I said I'll go out for a walk, and my friend said, "Hey, come on, it's -20 and everything's shut. It's already 5 p.m., right?" And guess what? There was one shop that was open, and this Chinese lady came out and asked me in Chinese, "Do you want something to eat?" And I was like, "Mom, you are right. You are right. Like
Oh
it
my
can't be
God.
further away, and I can eat noodles."
Oh my
You
God.
heard?
So
Yeah.
yeah.
I was in Germany and I almost wanted to tell, my counterparts in Germany, like, don't compete. Like, don't bother competing because none of you are prepared to work as hard as Chinese, right? Let's just collaborate and let's just do whatever, you contribute what you're good at and we contribute what we are good at. For my engineers, if I send them something at 8 p.m. on Sunday night, and I will immediately receive a response apologizing and saying, I'm having dinner with my family, so I cannot immediately reply you, but you will receive everything by midnight. So I don't think Europeans or, Americans or, any other countries prepared to do that. So that shop in the middle of nowhere in, Europe opening in the middle of night, yeah, that's Chinese just so hardworking. During COVID, I always laugh about this. During COVID, there were a lot of protests that happened. Only Chinese were protesting because they couldn't go to work.
Yeah, that's true.
Everybody else was protesting because they have to go to work. And only Chinese that let us go back to work. It's kind of sad in many ways. That's why I think coming back to our earlier point, Tamping is probably a healthy balance from the younger generation.
Jen, there's one big topic left that I really wanted to get into with you, and that is going back to what I had said in the intro and what you had acknowledged along the way. So you are also a mom. That's one of the very important hats that you wear. And so Jason and I are obviously not moms, but we're dads of two. We each have two young boys, right? So mine are 1 and 3, and his are 2 and 5, or 3 and 5. And we think about this and we talk about this a lot. So in this day and age where AI and just generally the algos, right, seem to be very influential over what we think, how we see the world, and what we know even, or how we learn. How do you think about this with your daughters specifically?
Yeah, thank you for asking this question. Those kind of questions probably occupy my mind during the night, especially when I can't sleep the most. I have two daughters, and my older one is in university, just finishing her fresh year, and my younger one is in senior, so she will go to university next year. And I grew up reading Tao Te Ching, Zhuangzi, so one of this philosophy which has very, very deep wisdom that I often return to whenever I face very big challenges or big questions that's hard to answer, which is do nothing, then nothing's left undone. So, so I think, of course, I work in AI. I use very mathematical lens to try to understand AI. I also love reading quantum physics, and because I'm curious about how human brain work. And if you try to understand neuroscience, and then you will inevitably, stumble upon a lot of research in terms of where consciousness come from. And if you're curious about consciousness, when you will inevitably stumble upon how the frontier research of consciousness is all related to quantum mechanics and quantum biology. And in many ways, this is a long story short, I think we overly emphasize that AI society. We make AI as the overarching theme of what's going to drive our society. I do think it's going to be the most consequential technology mankind has ever invented. But going back to the philosophy I subscribe, do nothing and nothing left undone. Instead of trying to figure out what the world's going to look like in 20 years time, I kind of go back to what kind of life I want my kids to live. And I basically told my daughters two things. I told them, you have to do two things for me. And one is find something that you feel passionate about. And sometimes we don't find our passion until later in the life, which is fine. But at least right now, you have to find something that you truly care about. And number two is that once you find that, you have to try 120%. And in order to achieve whatever problem you truly care about. If you can do these two things, I don't care which university you go to. I don't care what kind of job you end up doing. I think you will live a very good life. And either along the way, you're going to adopt all kind of tools, that including AI or not, you're going to figure out, because you will find your inner agency to solve the problem you really care about. And you're going to care about what's the best tools, right? Maybe it's AI, maybe it's some other technology. And I think not to confuse that tool as your overarching theme is probably a better guidance for younger generation. As a result, I'm very proud that my both daughters are very sensible, and they're both ambitious in their own ways, but they're also very grounded, living this overly noisy, sometimes intimidating, daunting world of trying to navigate through complex political world, and also converge with ever-changing technology. And do nothing and nothing is left undone. Yeah, think that for a second. Think that for the rest of your life.
I mean, I love Taoism and Lao Tzu as well. And so thank you so much for sharing it like that, because I think, those two are simple but very powerful frameworks to think about things, right? You need something that will get you excited, to get you out of bed, and it means something to you. And at the same time, if it does mean something to you, then you should be excited to also then give it everything, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and stick with it, right? I think what's it kind of embedded in those two asks that you formulated to them is also to give it some time, right? Because it's like the most incredible thing. If you start something, you have this Jason and I often say, the story from the alchemist, the universe conspires in your favor when you start something new, right? It's this beginner's luck. So you can all of a sudden, you're like, oh, I'm already amazing at this. And it's like, but it kind of wears off. So you have to really stick with it to get to anything approaching, mastery, being, maybe 10 years down the line or something. And I think you miss out on these compounding effects of your own abilities and your own insights if you switch too quickly, right? So, and so so I think it's really good advice, and I'll definitely keep pondering that in regards to my own children. Yeah, thank you for that. I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
I think, as parent, it's a very humbling experience, right? You guys are still in the beginning of the process. Just wait for teenage.
Yeah.
It will be a very different challenge. But I think uh, being be a good parent is almost like um, a process to practice departure your ego and bring humility, because those little individuals, they may look like you a little bit, they might talk like you a little bit, they might carry some of your traits, but ultimately they're their own person, and they're gonna do something completely different compared to you, and it's a good thing. My older daughter ended up, she just loved environmental studies, and she's focusing on, that's her passion. She just want to do something to to protect the environment. And so she's study all the science and biology on that. And my younger daughter, at the beginning, I tried to push her to study neuroscience, and because I think human brain is so interesting and all that, it's my ego, it's my projection on her. And when I give her permission to pursue what she truly feel passionate about, she ended up telling me, I want to get business side of music. It's completely left field from what I envisioned, but seeing how passionate she is, and how much time she's willing to spend on that, I think it's a fantastic thing. So yeah, just remove your ego and allow your kids to blossom in their own way. It's beautiful.
Jen, thank you so much. I mean, I can honestly say you've blown my mind at least 3 or 4 times during this conversation, at least. And I really super grateful for you taking the time and for sharing these insights so authentically and so directly. So I really big kudos.
Thank you.
Jay, any other comments, questions, remarks?
No, I also just want to say I really, really appreciate the time, and I will be thinking a lot about what you've shared, and I hope at some point we could maybe talk again, because I feel like I need some time to digest it. I would love to see how the stuff you're working on has been progressing.
Mhm.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Jen. Really, really appreciate it, and thank you, Louis, for putting us in touch.
Yeah,
That's
thank
right.
you, Louis.
Yeah.
Thank you both. This being such rich conversation, and I really enjoyed. Thank you so much for the opportunity to allow us to nerd out a few things that you don't often get opportunity to share. So thank you.
And that wraps up our main conversation. But we're not done yet. We're going into overtime, where Jason and I unpack some insights, reflect on what just happened, and connect a few dots. And go.
How do we, Jason, seriously, how do we keep somehow leveling up? Like, it's not even so like this. So I'm hesitant to say this because I do not by any means mean to cast a shadow on previous episodes, right? Not at all, because they were all remarkable in their own right. But this, for me, just now was another level of a um it's another level of exchange on the like hitting so many of the topics that I know you care so deeply about, right? And we think about so much, and like having the opportunity to discuss it with somebody like Jen is just, it's just incredible.
Yeah, I'm a bit also lost for words because I don't really know what to say. I just enjoyed it so much.
Yeah.
I feel like she's one of these people, right, that I want to give her a bow to say, "Oh, you're such an amazing, inspiring mentor." I want to give her a fist bump to say, "So glad that you're in the human race with us," right? I want to give her a hug to say, "Hey, come on, man, make sure this project works," right? Like, yeah, what you're working on so important. So for me, I really enjoyed it, and so glad that we somehow the universe conspired to allow us to cross wires, right?
Yeah. I mean, big thanks to Luis Vincent Gave, right?
Yeah,
And I mean that conversation we had with him was had a very similar feel, and but I think having a LVG-esque person that has actually has grown up in China, like it's not hard. I'd imagine it's not easy to find, but then I guess maybe I'm just
No. I think you're right. I think it's hard to find somebody that knows China inside out because they've grown up in China and then yet still have the language to be so relevant and to interface with the West, right?
Mhm.
So in some ways, it is pretty cool. She is like a mirror image of LVG, right?
Yeah, in some aspects, and not in others, but that's the individual, very human. Yeah, it was so many topics, right? We touched on. I think we did a decent job covering very broad spectrum of different topics, but each of these was giving so much ground. I could have talked to her for an hour just about power dynamics and water and all the, like these business ideas and kind of the fundamental challenge they're trying to overcome. That by itself could be a whole episode for me. Then of course the discourse of East and West, where so much more to be gained from collaborating, focusing on the common ground. I mean, you could have a whole PhD thesis on that, right? it's an
You could have a
incredible,
few PhD theses on
yeah.
that.
It's such an incredible topic.
That's why I think it's so cool what she said, and I totally agree, right? Like I've been telling, for example, Albert and all these other guys, like for me, like travel is the antidote to ignorance, right? And I think what China did to allow people to come in and to see and to allow RedNote to share what people have seen, it's just the best because what can you and I actually think most Americans would go there and not actually feel any animosity. They would see it and they'll get inspired and they'll go, hey, let's do this at home, right? Let's do it at home. And why not? Like, just because I lose to you in football doesn't mean I stop playing with you. I need to, kick you in the bum, right? It's like, okay, I go home and I'll practice my skills a bit more. And I think the reason, from what I can tell, the reaction to China is such is because, like she says, the media is so irresponsible. So they're sowing so much fear about China rather than sowing friendly competition, right?
Yeah, but it's
Or even stiff competition. It's still better than fear.
but there's a lot of there's so many reasons, right? So on the last episode, we discussed this with a German friend, and he said, yeah, there's a lot of China bashing because people find ways to profit from it, right? So they put their money into very critical news. I mean, I don't fake news, or maybe there's a kernel of truth, but it's presented in such a ridiculous light that it sounds so negative, and they find a way to make money by shorting companies they're talking about, or shorting the Hong Kong dollar, or who knows what, right? And
Right.
It's a very purposeful. It is what did she say? She didn't say ignorance. It's prejudice.
Intentionally
Right.
irresponsible. She said. Oh, and she
Yeah.
said, yeah, there is prejudice in the.
But it's prejudice, I think, that's been engineered for decades, and it's very unfortunate. I feel like I really have to go. I mean, I've been to Shanghai that one time, and it's just not enough, right? I really want to also go and see it for myself.
Yeah, man, probably give Jen a call or Louis a call. Maybe somebody could show you around, or Peter, show you around Shenzhen, right? They would know someone there. And in your line of work, why not
My
see where the nexus of it is, right?
So really, I really need to think about this, because it feels almost irresponsible for my company not to have an office in Shenzhen, right? If we really, or how am I saying
Yeah.
it? Shenzhen?
Shenzhen,
Shenzhen.
yeah,
Because
Shenzhen, yeah.
it would probably be like a main line of just inspiration, and what, just sheer, what do you even call that, like just drive and energy, like the mind, for the mind, right?
The
I mean, yeah,
yardstick and the frame, right?
yeah,
The yardstick and the frame. What's possible will be redefined, and
yeah.
you know, yeah.
Bring that
I think
energy
I
back
think you
to the
should.
West.
I think you should, if for no other reason than to see what you're up against, right? See what's possible, see what you're up against, meet like-minded people, for sure.
Yeah. And I didn't fully, to be honest, understand the do nothing, then nothing is left undone. So maybe you can explain that to me at some point.
Yeah,
I
try and read the Tao Te Ching, man. It's such an important book for me. I think it's just basically saying, like, of course you can go in so many deeper layers, right? But at the end of the day, the world works, so don't feel like important things are happening all the time. And sometimes just because you feel like you want to be busy and you might do something, but your action of choosing to act might be wrong,
I
right?
see.
Maybe
The
that cake doesn't need to be beat one more time, right? That batter mix, it's okay. Give it time to rise and it will do its own thing. And I think she meant that in the context, if Jen's listening, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe she meant that in the context also of her kids, right? In Chinese, there's also a saying like, don't go and pull the shoots out of the ground because you want them to grow faster.
right.
Because you kill it.
Well,
You kill it.
it's also as a parent, right? You have to let them figure out what to do with this AI in this context of the AI and the future and the education, etc. It's like it's really also their challenge to figure out. So as a parent, it is probably better to say, I'm not the one to take action in respect to my, college age children and AI. It's really onto them to figure this out. Maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I loved it at the beginning. I knew the conversation was going to be good when we talked about the young Chinese now being a bit demotivated, right? To go out and work hard. And her empathy and, maybe even sympathy, right? To understand where they're coming from and to not it'd be so easy for her, to say, oh, how much I how little I had when I had to grow up and what I had to do and all, look at these guys, they've got everything and they want to just sit on their bums, right? Like she could have done that, like millennial bash them easily, right? But rather she said, hey, in some ways she's even envious, and it just shows that she's got that ability to see things from different perspectives, right?
Well, she also, I mean, she immediately framed her own experience, her own suffering very relative, right? She was like, yeah, I grew up with nothing, but so did everybody else, right? It wasn't special. Like I wasn't special because of this, but it's of course something that did shape me, right? I think that's a very healthy, very real way of dealing, like thinking about this in your past, right? And it's
Yeah,
something that I try to also emphasize about when I think about my own past. It's like, yeah, things happen, good things, bad things, etc. But so so does it to many other people. That by itself does not set me apart. It's often then how you respond to it or what you do with it, right, that then
right,
makes the difference. So it's
right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I'm gonna go about the rest of my day. I mean, my mind is awash. And my emotions as well, not just my mind, right?
Well, I want to find the Financial Times article where she commented on DeepSeek. I'm really curious about that.
Mm,
I want to read up on that. And what an incredible person to have been on our show, and what a great person to add to our network. Hopefully, right? Just very grateful for the experience.
yeah, me
So
too. Me too.
thank you,
Super
Jason.
grateful.
Without you and I doing this, none of us would have, like, we both wouldn't have this experience, right? So also
Exactly,
thank
exactly.
you.
Yeah, and yeah, thank you. I wanted to say that but I thought maybe not super appropriate, but when she said, you go out and do whatever you want to do and you see how it develops over time, right? I was just, while she said that, I was sitting there thinking, yeah, here I am talking to you with my good friend Lovis. This would never have happened, right? Unless you took that step out to chase something unseen.
All right, man. That's call it and go and let the impressions percolate.
Yeah, man. Thanks, Lovis. It was so much fun. Thank you.